Shalom, shalom, family. Yes, this is your brother Dana, and I'm coming to you from the city of Atlanta, from a place in one love. The last several videos I have done have either been a story, a testimony, or a lesson that the Most High Yah had brought me through over those almost 30 years that I lived in Chicago. Now, they have not been in chronological order, so I'm going to try to make a little bit of sense of all of this here in this video, as I also share with you another story. So I moved into Chicago in January of '94, where I began Moody Bible Institute. 2 months later, in March of '94, is when I had that altercation with those 5 young black men that changed the course of my life. Several months later, in May of '94, is when I became the part-time youth pastor at Rogers Park Baptist Church in Rogers Park. And then upon graduation in the spring of '96, that fall is when I moved to Rogers Park. But when I was a student, when I got off the subway or the train at Morse Avenue, I walked about 1.5 miles to get to this church. Part of that journey was down Morse Avenue, and that's where I noticed all of the gang members and the drug dealers. So I also would look at that one apartment and say, Father, I would love to live there when I move here one day, because it put me right where I wanted to be. Well, that was the apartment he gave me, but that was also the apartment where I was robbed. Now I'm living there, and every day I would get out and I would walk around Morse Avenue to pray, but also to try and build relationships with the guys out on the streets. Eventually that happened, and I got to know many of them. Most of them were a part of a smaller group of gang members called the Farwell Boys. I remember Q-Tip. I had earned respect. So anytime there was going to be a transaction, they would let me know that I needed to move out of the way in case something would go wrong. They didn't want me to go down with that. So when I returned one of those times, I looked at Q-Tip and I said, wow, Q-Tip, I wish you would, just stop selling drugs. And it was at that moment he grabbed me by the shirt and he pushed me up against the wall and he said, Rev, let me show you something. He led me to where he was living, and he opened up the apartment door, and almost immediately his 2.5 to 3-year-old sister in diapers ran up to him. I heard his 1-year-old brother sitting in a high chair at the table crying. And when you looked at his face, you knew he had been crying for quite some time. And then over on the sofa was his mother, because of the things that she had inhaled. She was in a deep sleep. Q-Tip went over and he opened up the refrigerator and he said, you know what, Rev? When you or all your people can help me put food in there to feed my brother and my sister, I might be able to get off those streets. It was at that time that my attitude changed. That when I walked and prayed, I asked the Father to protect them. And one of the things that developed was godly street talk. A gentleman had a coffee shop, and I asked him if he would allow us to hold this meeting on a Thursday night, and he said yes. So every Thursday night started with a few, but ended with anywhere between 20 and 30 gang members or drug dealers from that neighborhood would come in, and we would talk about life. And it was there that I learned so much of the obstacles and the hardships that these young men had endured. I also saw that these young men were entrepreneurs. They were leaders with gifts and talents that lived in a society that rejected them and limited them and casted them away simply because they were black. So when I walked those streets, I asked the Father to protect these young kings until they truly found their royalty. The church was a part-time job, so I worked a full-time job. When I started, I think I made about $266 a month. When I left the church nearly 9 years later, 10 years later, I was making $300 a month. So I lived in this apartment and I would walk the streets over and over and I prayed. And one day as I was walking, I stepped down with my right foot and a pain shot up me because I stepped on a stone. But when I looked, there was no stone, so I took my shoe off to shake it out and no stone fell out. So when I got home, maybe it was in my sock, but there was no stone. But from that point on, every day I would walk, that pain increased until I noticed a little bump. And so I made an appointment with a foot specialist. His name happened to be Dr. Michael J. Fox. Came in and he said, Mr. Stevens, you have a tumor, and this tumor is like plantar fibrosis. It's a hard tumor, so the only way that I can remove it for you is through surgery. So we planned that surgery, and so for the first week, I was on crutches, and for about a month, I was in one of those nice boots. Just as that foot was getting to a place I could take that boot off, I started stepping on that stone with my left foot. But it wasn't a stone, but it was a tumor. And so I had surgery. I was on crutches for the first week. I was in that boot for a month. And upon getting that boot off, that stone reappeared back to my right foot. Did the surgery, had the crutches, had the boot, was all excited that finally maybe I can begin to really run. But then my left foot started stepping on that stone again. This went back and forth to 5 surgeries. And now as I started to walk, that pain appeared again in my left foot. But there was times as I would walk, my foot would not move and I would slide and trip. Wouldn't be able to lift my foot up. So when I went back to Dr. Fox, he came in with a report that was even worse, that these tumors developed themselves out of my ligaments and my tendons. And because of the multiple tumors in this foot, it had detached some of my ligaments, and that is why I was not able to lift my foot, which would cause me to trip. But this surgery, he said, would be a good 4 to 4.5 hours, and when they would do them, they would clamp from below your knee all of your blood flow. But after about 1.5 to 2 hours, your tendons and your tissue would begin to deteriorate. So this surgery would be done on one day and completed a week later. And this time I was on crutches for nearly 6 months. And I was in a boot for nearly a year. During this time, I continued to do my best to walk the streets. At this time, I had already begun to go down to Cook County Jail. And just as I was ready to be free of the boot, my right foot developed a tumor. And my right foot began to do the same thing, that as I would step to walk, I wasn't able to lift my foot sometimes, and I would trip and fall. I went in to see Dr. Fox. And he came into the office and he said, Dana, by this time we were friends. He said, Dana, I'm so sorry. He says, we're going to have to do that major surgery to your right foot. This would have been surgery number 8 and surgery number 9. Literally, it was 1 year that I had that last surgery. So I said, give me a couple weeks to be able to live without crutches and without any boot, because at that point, it was almost 2 years of constant boots and crutches. And during that time, a friend had invited me to go to Africa with Bishop. And so I decided to postpone my surgery to go on this trip to Nigeria, where we would fly into Lagos and then journey to Benin City, where we would link arms with Mama Idahosa. And then we would end our time in Port Harcourt. And so as we were flying to Lagos, I remember asking God to please heal me, because I heard that in Africa, you showed up and did miracles and great things. Well, we got there and we were in Lagos, and then we got to Benin City, and at Benin, it was a revival, and it was the last night of our time there. And before we left our home, I remember talking to Bishop. He saw that I was down, and he said, what's going on, Brother Dana? And I said, Bishop, I asked God to heal me, and we're getting to the last part of our time here, and my tumor, and he said, but don't give up, Brother Dana. He said, we haven't left Africa yet. And I'm like, you're right. So we got to this outdoor revival, and we got up on this stage where I was sitting with Bishop, who was later to speak. And as far as your eye could see, you saw Nigerians listening and gathering. They estimated between 25 to 30,000. Well, the worship leader, who I had seen previously but had never talked to him, did not know him, got up to begin our time with worship. The music was playing, he got done praying, and every time he would go to begin to sing, there became hesitation. And he would go and he hesitated, and finally he said, my God, I hear you. And at that moment, he turned and he looked straight at me and he said, God has heard you. Your tumors, they are gone. When he turned to look at me, even before he spoke a word, I began to feel a burning in my feet. And that burning went up my legs. And I stood up, and he put his hand out. Moments later, I woke up, laying on the ground. But I also woke up with no pain and no tumor. So on the flight home, I asked the Most High, why did it take me coming to Africa for you to heal? And he said, son, it's because you've always put me in a box. And when you place me there, I will stay there. But when your faith allows me out, I can do things that are above and beyond anything you could ever ask or imagine. So naturally, I called up Dr. Fox, and I said, I need to come in, but I said, I got something I need to share with you. So I got there, and I shared with him the situation and that my tumor was gone. But see, Dr. Fox didn't believe in God, but yet over those months and me sharing about my life and about God in my life, he began to have a little bit more of an awareness that maybe God was real, and he entertained it. He also had a good friend that he said for years tried to get him to go to church. He said, I need to go take those x-rays and all of that. And he did, and I remember him walking into the office, and this time he had tears streaming down his face. And he said, Dana, he says, there's only one way that those tumors would disappear, and that would be through surgery. He says, I didn't do surgery on that foot. He said, not only are your tumors gone, but he said, even your ligaments and your tendons where they were ripped are fused and healed. We both wept, and on that day, Dr. Michael J. Fox acknowledged in his heart that there was a God. Family, that's been how many years ago, and I've never had a tumor in my foot since. I know that those tumors were supposed to hinder me, stop me from what the Most High Yah had called me to do, but I did everything in my power to fight through. And I've also learned that when we let our Father out of our box, even our box of indoctrination, He can show up and show out to who He really is. I pray that this testimony of the power of our Father will bless you and give you the strength or the encouragement or the hope that you may need, family, in whatever situation you need our Father to show up and show out in. This is your brother coming to you from the city of Atlanta. May the Most High Yah forever receive all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise. Shalom, family.